Body Logic Physiotherapy, empowering people to achieve better health.
I guess the biggest thing for me was knowing that pain wasn't coming from damage and that the scan wasn't telling the truth. I mean, there's so many people out there that would have the exact same scan as me that wouldn't even know.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Empowered Beyond Pain podcast, proudly brought to you by Body Logic Physiotherapy. Today we're talking imaging, MRIs, CTs, X-rays, radiographs. We're talking scans and low back pain. This comes from Fact 4 of the 10 Facts Every Person Should Know About Back Pain paper, published in the BJSM that Professor Peter O'Sullivan, Dr. JP Kiniro and myself, as well as others co-authored. We talked about how that paper was motivated by the rehabilitation stories of almost 100 people who were profoundly disabled by their back pain in episode 4, and then shared some of those stories in episode 5. Fact 4, presented by patient voice Adrian McGregor, was:
Scans rarely show the cause of back pain.
Scans are important, but only for a minority of people. Lots of scary sounding things can be reported on scans, such as disc bulges, degeneration, protrusions, arthritis, and so on. Unfortunately, the reports don't say that these findings are very common in people without back pain, and that they don't predict how much pain you feel or how disabled you are. Scans also often change, with most disc prolapses shrinking over time. Today, Pete and I welcome another patient voice, Joe. Joe also featured in episode 4 and 5, but today we're particularly talking to him about his imaging findings and the impact they had on him. Pete and I also discuss some of the research around imaging and back pain. The take-homes: imaging is a fantastic technology, but only required for about 5 to 10% of people with back pain. Scans are so detailed these days, but this also means they report things we now know may be more to do with painless aging than pain, like disc degeneration, bulges and arthritis. MRI reports don't appear to be that reliable. We talk about a study where the same person with back and leg pain went to 10 different MRI centres and practically got 10 different results. Scan findings change over time, with most disc prolapses resorbing by themselves, and often irrespective of whether pain or function changes. Routine imaging does not improve outcomes and can be harmful, not to mention costly. We highlight a study that showed an 8 times greater risk of surgery and 5 times greater medical cost if people had MRIs when they shouldn't have, which happens more frequently than not. Imaging findings appear to be mainly related to genetics and don't appear to be predicted by heavy manual work, either occupational or leisure time. In fact, there was indications that routine loading may have benefits to the disc. We hope you find this episode insightful. If you did, please share it with a few people you think may benefit, or leave a review on iTunes. The show notes for this episode features 3 infographics related to imaging and scans for low back pain, as well as the references for this episode. You can find them at www.bodylogic.physio/podcast. And remember to ask, is there more to pain than damage? So, welcome everyone. We're here in episode 14 of the podcast. The topic today is how relevant are scans for back pain? This is a really common belief and a common thing that we probably see as clinicians, that people come in with their scans. So I think it's a really important topic to address.
Yeah.
And we have someone with a lived experience of how scans can influence a person's life, really. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. G'day, Kev. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'd love to start with just a brief synopsis of your story, and then we'll get into how your scan findings influenced your life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I mean, this is quite a long time ago now, but so I guess my story with back pain started in 2013-ish, so about 7-8 years ago. And so what happened with me is I had an incident at a job, had some really sharp pain go down to my foot. Pretty much just saw a couple of physios, chiros, that sort of thing. In the meantime, it didn't get better for a fairly long period of time. It was about 6 months. And I went and got a scan at that point, and it showed that I had a couple of disc bulges and some annular tears. And I mean, there was the word degeneration was used in it. And pretty much after that scan, everything just sort of went from being bad to just, completely crashing. I think at that point in time, I was told that I had a good back for a 50-year-old or 60-year-old. It's a couple of years ago now, so I'm struggling to remember the exact terminology that was used. But I just remember that in my head, I was 27 at the time. And to hear that you've got the back of a 50-year-old when you're 27 and you're working in a really active job, I know just scared the absolute crap out of me. And from that point, I started limiting my movements. I started avoiding certain things like bending and lifting and twisting and that sort of stuff, the movements that I believed were bad for me at that point in time. And so I got really, really strong through my core and was always bracing and made sure that I was tense to lift and that sort of thing, the advice that you sort of hear a lot. But essentially, I got the scans and that took me from a point where I was not great, but then it just sent me right off a cliff. And that was, in my mind, that was the beginning of my really long period of back pain. And that's where, for me, I feel like that's the sort of period where it all went really, really downhill. So after that point in time, I had probably the next 2-3 years where I was doing all these core exercises. I was always sitting bolt upright and I was avoiding more and more and more movements. And it was sort of weird. As I avoided more and more and more movements, I found that everything just got stiffer and stiffer. And so instead of getting better, my pain sort of got worse. But at the same time, I was still going to work. I was still doing as much as I could, but I was doing it always sort of like a robot and sort of bolt upright. And so it was after about that. So it was probably 3 years in that I then had a complete relapse. I had another incident where I was lifting a heavy object and I had that same pain just shoot down to my foot. And it just, yeah, it was a really scary time in my life. And then that's, fortunately for me at that stage, I got some really good advice. And from that, it sort of just got me sort of instead of going slowly backwards and being in more and more pain and avoiding more things, that was the period where I got some good advice at the right time, thank goodness, because who knows what was going to happen. And then I just started progressing, and so now I'm back to doing absolutely everything that I love, which is great. I'm back surfing and kite surfing and wing foiling, and I'm taking up new sports, mountain biking, freediving, and it's just, yeah, I don't avoid anything anymore. I'm back to doing absolutely everything I love. So yes, it's...
So that's a hell of a journey, Joe. You're
talking through. Look, well, I was sort of trying to get through a 7-year period in 2 or 3 minutes without taking up too much time. But so that is a very abbreviated version. I mean, the full story is a lot longer than that. And I mean, everyone that's sort of going through a similar thing out there, I mean, you just you know how much stuff is in between all of that, but it's I was just trying to cut it short. But yeah, so, and it hasn't been smooth either. It wasn't just down then back up. I mean, I had a down, back up, and then a little dip again, and so it's nothing smooth, but I look back on where I was and where I've come from, and I'm just so grateful to be back doing the things that I love doing, and it was a really simple it was a mindset change as much as anything, but I guess the biggest thing for me was knowing that pain wasn't coming from damage, and that the scan wasn't telling the truth. I mean, there's so many people out there that would have the exact same scan as me that wouldn't even know. And so it's.
Did you know that at the time, Joe?
No, absolutely not.
You know that now, don't you?
I know that now, and I know that looking back, and as I said, that's just from the advice I got. But no, at the time when I got the scan, essentially, it gave the pain meaning. So the pain, all of a sudden I was like, oh, well, so the reason why I have pain is because I've got these disc bulges, which are going to be aggravating nerves and then inflaming stuff. And so I've got to look after them. Otherwise it's just going to get worse. And so that was sort of the mindset the scan put me into.
So
and
it kind of made sense to you.
yeah, absolutely. It gave the pain meaning. It sort of went, well, there's pain because there's damage there. So how am I going to prevent more damage? And then that's when I went down the track of avoiding things that I thought would damage me further. So
can I just ask you, Joe, around the time that you got the scan, what were you actually told about it?
So I was told that, that I had bulges that were close to nerves. I don't even know if they were pushing on the nerves, but and then there was annular fissures, which I don't actually truthfully know what that means, but it doesn't sound good.
What does it sound like for you?
Well, look, the real summary for me was when I got told I had the back of a 50-year-old,
Right.
and I thought, well, if I've got the back of a 50-year-old now, how much time do I have left doing the things that I love?
Yeah.
And so that was sort of what the scan meant to me, is sort of gave me the impression that my days of being active and fit and healthy and that sort of stuff was sort of limited.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess.
Did that create a picture in your head of what your back looked like?
Yeah, sort of unstable and a bit like compressed down, and maybe some, just damage and old and frail, I guess, was the one big word that scared me the most, I guess, was degenerative or degeneration, because that to me sort of said, well, this is what it's like now. It's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
So
what does that word degenerative look like in your head?
Oh, that's a good question. Essentially, it's the removal of what I enjoy doing. If it's degenerative and it's not going to get better, then I sort of felt, well, if this is where I am now, and I'm 27, 30, at the time when I had the second major incident, then, well, I call it a major incident when realistically it was just a pain event. But it sort of put in my head, well, if this is what I'm like now, what are my options to continue doing what I'm doing? And so it puts into your head ideas like fusions, surgeries, all those things that, absolutely last resort.
So it's interesting that the languaging around a scan is scary, and we know that from the research that it can be really scary for people. But it sounds like the biggest threat for you was this kind of the sense that it was taking away things you loved. And that threatened your job, but also the stuff outside your work,
hobbies, everything I love. It was my I guess my identity was so tied up in being able to do, active things, because all I've ever done is, activities and stuff outside and sports. And so as soon as I sort of saw the scan and heard the way it was described, it scared the absolute hell out of me. And then it was funny, but, after the doctor that I now see, he sort of said, to do with this story, he said, bring the scans in and I'll have a look at them. And he sort of went, oh yeah, so pretty minor changes. I was like, well, if only that was the advice that I got originally. Right. Oh, these are minor changes. No, you can still do absolutely everything that you love. Yeah. These findings do not explain your pain. Yeah. I think your pain is because you're always moving like a robot. You're tense. You're not moving. Yeah. If that was the advice I got at the 6-month mark, I wouldn't.
It changed your journey.
It would have just been a 6-month journey.
How easy is it, do you think, to get to go from having a belief that your back is, you got these language which is on a scan report, like bulges and fissures and degeneration, which don't sound particularly good. If you had a house you're going to buy, and the advertisement has got bulges, fissures, and it's degenerating, you probably wouldn't buy it.
And this looks like a 50-year-old home, and really it's only 20 years old.
Exactly.
You probably wouldn't buy it at some.
Exactly.
It sounds like it's crumbling.
Exactly. So how easy is it to flip that thought from to then be told, actually, no, this is normal. This is not a big deal. How hard is that? How hard was that for you?
It was extremely hard, but it was made a lot easier by getting the right advice, the reassurance along. It would have been impossible to do on my own.
Right.
From where I was, without outside help, without intervention, and the right intervention, I was never going to get better.
Right.
So it's unbelievably hard. But when you get the right help and the right advice, then as soon as I got the right advice, my progress was remarkably quick, I would say. But there was some ups and downs along the way. But I mean, it was funny. I said to my partner that when I after about a year, when things were just absolutely humming along, I said to Joe, I said I would have sold the house to feel like this. If someone had told me, look, this is a new spine, it's going to cost you 150 grand and it's going to make you feel this good, I would have said, oh, where do I sign up?
Yeah.
So I mean, the fact that it was only it was all, in my own hands. It was a self-management. It was just movements and exercise I was doing. I mean, it was.
Yeah. Can I come back to that thought though? Because what you're highlighting is the sense of desperation when you're in a trap.
Oh, yeah.
And the interesting thing you're saying is that the languaging around the scan was scary.
Yeah.
And the way you then responded to the scan was to kind of protect your back.
Even more.
Was that something you were told to do, or is that something you kind of worked out for yourself?
I think it was something that, I mean, you always, there's stuff in the media all the time about, strong core helps stabilize your back. And when you hear stuff like, when you hear something say you need to stabilize your back, you think, well, my back must be unstable. And so it's like, well, okay, so therefore, I've got pain. It must be because of instability. And then on top of that, you get the scan that says, here's all the damage. This is why the pain's there.
Right.
So I guess the pain was there because essentially I wasn't moving in a natural way, which then prolonged the length of the pain.
But
then
was
I got
that
the scan.
because you decided to do that yourself? Were you taught to do that?
Well, I just sort of went, well, I've got a sports science background, and so I in that degree, I mean, we did learn, to protect your back and to have a strong core, and when you're lifting heavy objects, to brace and that sort of stuff. And I mean, so it's something that I sort of worked out. But I think that there's a lot of people in the same boat as me, and so I guess then when you throw the scan on top, then my movements became even more unnatural and even more guarded, and then it just sort of spiraled from there.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And so the scan, the thought of the scan, the languaging around it created these kind of responses that for you made you think you needed to protect that back. Guard it, not move it.
Absolutely.
Hold it rigid.
Yeah. Well, I thought
that kind of led you down a path of losing function and making you more vulnerable.
Absolutely. I thought that, if I kept my back nice and straight all the time, that, that would give it a chance to heal, when really what it was doing was my back was probably fine, but it was just so stiff that it was painful. So
got it. How did that impact on you emotionally?
Oh, well, I wasn't doing anything that was fun. I thought that my work was threatened. It was terrible. I mean, I can't believe the impact that it had on my mental health, which then only fed back in to make my pain even worse.
So it's interesting you say that, Joe, because I know there's a lot of stigma around back pain, and people are like, it's in your head sort of thing. But we know that losing what you're tapping into is that losing your ability to be in control of the things you love to engage with work has a massive effect on someone's mental health.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's like a really natural consequence.
Absolutely.
And just losing stuff.
And I mean, if someone said to me, this is all in your head, to me, that would have been better than going on paper, oh, here's your scan, this is why it's painful.
Right. But you did have a problem in your back from what you're saying.
That's right.
But it just stopped you doing the stuff you love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you said the advice that you got given really helped you, when you saw these new people that seemed to help you more. What was that advice around the scan? What was the advice that helped you move on?
So I guess the great advice that I got was that, there's lots of people with similar scans to me that wouldn't even know it walking around the places. And so it's like, well, what's the difference between me and them? How can, I get from being a symptomatic disc bulge to being an asymptomatic disc bulge. And the fact that people had similar, much worse scans than me and wouldn't even know was a sign of, was hope. It gave me a bit of hope. And then also, I just got reassured that stuff like bending, twisting, loading was all safe and extremely, it's natural and safe to do those movements. And so it just meant that as soon as I started to unlock movements and be able to move more naturally, well, it sort of did two things. One, it reassured me that I wasn't even close to being as damaged as I thought I was.
Yeah.
But it also had a massive alleviating effect on my pain, because I'd been held in this brace for so long, and of course I was stiff. Of course it was painful to go. If I'm bolt upright all the time, as soon as I did that, there was pain, because that was an unnatural, unnormal movement for me at that point in time. And so as soon as I got told, no, look, it's safe to just go through, your body is designed to move. You take your body through its range of motion. And as soon as I started to do that, it was, I guess what really helped is it was such a fast progression that it was almost irrefutable that I was on the right track finally.
So it was the lived experience that can convince you the most.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't just being told.
Oh, that's it. It was, I wasn't only doing all these movements and getting back into activity, which I love to do, but it was having a drastic impact on the pain levels in the right way.
How scary was that for you to start moving again, given that you'd gone into that whole protective space?
It was, every single time I got given a new movement by the physio that I engaged with, I thought he must be joking. I was like, I can't do that. You wanting me to pick something up with a bent back and then twist over my shoulder, loaded. He essentially recreated the movement that injured my back in the first place. So, every single time there was this progression, I was like, no, mate.
What did you think would happen?
I just thought, well, I'm gonna do this, twist over, I'm gonna pop the bulge again and then go back to square one. I thought that movement was dangerous, and I thought that maybe, got slip a disc or whatever you call it. But I thought that it could re-injure it and set me back. And I was so worried about going backwards that I was like, no, like I'm happy. I can bend now. Like, can't we just leave it there? No, it was funny that the first session I had, I remember getting asked, so what movements don't you want to do? And I was like, oh, okay, thank God. So I can't bend, I can't twist, I don't want to carry anything heavy one-handed. I don't want to, so, okay, cool. I thought, that would be, okay, so we won't go there. We'll try and work around those movements. And then I get into the session and it was like, all right, so let's start with bend, and just knocked them off one after the other. And the next day I was so, like, my muscles were all so sore, and it was sort of a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. But the actual niggly, sharp pain that I was experiencing wasn't any worse. And then from there, it was just a whole lot of moving and just a whole lot of progressing. But yeah.
Do you think that if you had been given the information that you sort of said, like loads of people out there are walking around with, backs that look worse than yours on a scan but have no pain whatsoever, would that have changed at all?
I think I had to go through it myself and actually experience it for myself rather than just being told, for it to really sink in about how, how simple, how right it was, but I don't think so.
Something that I do want to talk about though, because there's a lot of research out there, and we are researchers, so I think it's important we discuss some facts and bring some statistics or some numbers into some percentages into it. So one of the most famous studies, or I suppose most widely cited studies, is a systematic review that looked at about 3,000 people with back pain and also looked at a whole bunch of people without back pain. I've got the numbers here in terms of when they looked at those without back pain, what percentage of those people had these findings on a scan. So we'll kind of quickly rattle through them just briefly now. So 37% of 20-year-olds had disc degeneration. Remember, this is in people with no pain.
Yep.
80% of 50-year-olds had disc degeneration, and 96% of 80-year-olds had disc degeneration. And when it comes to disc bulging, 30% of 20-year-olds had disc bulging, 60% of 50-year-olds, 84% of 80-year-olds. So you can kind of see that there's this linear relationship between when you get older and the more likely it is that you're going to have findings on a scan.
Yep.
So they're quite big numbers. And I suppose the other important thing to sort of talk about that was that same author group also did a study where they looked at comparing findings in people that did have pain compared to findings in people that didn't have pain. And there was a slight increased likelihood that those with pain are going to show more findings.
Yep.
But I guess the important take home from that is it's not a death sentence.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you are likely to be one of those people. And it doesn't, the other thing, it doesn't predict your future in terms of who's more likely to have back pain as they get older or have back pain influence their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, when I got told those studies originally, and I looked into a bit of stuff myself with the research background, I sort of thought, well, if that's the case, like I fully understand, yeah, okay, if you've got findings, yeah, you're slightly more likely to have that. But then there's so many people who are asymptomatic with those. So how do I become one of the asymptomatic ones? And
That's the key.
That's it. And I mean, it could be largely to do with the advice that I got and just pretending like you don't have those findings and just living, and then, you know, it just all falls into place. I think
what you're tapping into as well is, when you're in pain and you don't have strategies to manage it, that kind of information may not be that helpful.
Yeah.
No, because it's like at the end of the day, hearing something's one thing, but it's what you do about it is another thing.
Oh, Pete, I reckon if you scan two people's backs, one person with findings and one person with no findings, and you told them the opposite of what they had, from my experience, I think that the person who got told that they had a damaged back would be more likely to end up in pain than the guy that got told they had a normal.
Start thinking differently, behaving differently, acting differently. Yeah.
I 100% agree. I mean, I had a guy that I know who had a back strain, and he had it for about 3 months. He ended up going and getting scanned, and he had an absolutely perfect scan. And so the doctor said to him, he said, there's no reason for your pain. It'll go away. And about a month later, he was fine.
Right.
I really do wonder if say that they got his scan mixed up.
Yeah, right.
And so he still had the perfect back, but he got his scan mixed up and it showed a whole bunch of damage. Yeah. And the doctor said to him, mate, your back's cooked.
Well,
I wonder.
We know that's true, actually, because there are studies that have been done randomizing people to like getting a scan or not getting a scan, and looking at what happens to people who get scanned. And look, let's be clear about the fact that there are some indications where scans are really, really important. We've said this before in other podcasts, but if there's a question of malignancy or fracture or infection or nerve compression, and particularly if it's affecting bladder function, it's an absolute indicator for a scan. But those things will show up on the scan as very important that need to be acted on immediately. In most cases, there is some indication in some situations that, for example, big disc prolapses, the majority do resolve in time. But if you've got progressive loss of power and bladder control, then that's an indicator that that's a significant problem that needs to be dealt with straight away. But that's sort of like a tiny percentage of people. 1%. It's like 1% of the population. The 99%, unfortunately, so often get scanned, and they get scanned outside the guidelines. So the guidelines say if you don't, if you've not had a trauma, there's not suspicion of a fracture.
Yep.
There's no suspicion of a cancer or indication of infection, or some inflammatory disease, and you've got no raging pain down the leg with a loss of power and sensation and bladder control problems, don't scan it. But the majority still end up getting scanned.
Yeah.
And the problem then is what Kev said, is then they get these labels dumped on you, and that can endure for a lifetime, where that person starts living a life like they've got to protect their damaged back because they might be young and they think their time's running out.
Yeah, yep.
So there was a study that looked at exactly what you're talking about. At 1 month, they looked at the people that got an early scan that they shouldn't have, and compared to matched controls, they were 8 times more likely to have surgery, and their healthcare costs were 5 times as high in workers.
And their general health and their time off work, and their level of function, all of those things are impacted just as you described.
Yeah.
So you are a living example of
absolutely.
of the research. Where you're a little unusual is that most of the studies suggest that when you get stuck at the point you're at, you don't get better.
I was.
So you are a bit unusual on
as
that account.
As I said, I got the right advice at the right time. I am almost certain that if I hadn't had the intervention, the positive intervention I had at that 3-year mark, that I would be sitting in front of you right now with some form of having gone under surgery for my back.
Which is a very common kind of next step.
Absolutely.
In the population.
I just, at that stage, I thought this has gone on long enough. I've gone back to square one. This is at 3. And I just thought, well, look, I'm probably going to end up needing some sort of intervention here to because I can't keep going like this.
Exactly.
I mean, the pain was always there and it was excruciating. And
horrible situation.
No, it's terrible.
The other thing that the other study that comes to mind is because we, as you said, Kev, we see that there is this relationship between what you see in a scan and someone's chance of having back pain. But what we have to understand is there's a lot of the population who might have back pain, who never seek care, who are never disabled or minimally impacted. They're not worried about it and they just get on with life. And they're out there, they never seek care. So we kind of lose them in the picture. There was a really interesting study that looked at people before they had back surgery. And they were either going to get a disc replacement or a fusion to their spine. And it rated the severity of their scan from 0 to 10. And then it looked at how much pain those people had and how disabled they had. And there was no relationship between the severity of the scan and how much pain and disability they had. Which is pretty scary, because if I was going to go and get a surgery on my body, I would want to know the thing that was the reason for the surgery was to treat my disability and pain. If I knew there was no relationship between those two, I'd be pretty concerned that might not be the right thing. And I think what it highlights is that pain's complex.
Absolutely.
And whether we can function or not is also complex, and it's linked to our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, and that's what you're alluding to. Is they're the things that change for you.
Absolutely. And when I was going well, everything was just going back in. It was a feedback loop, and so when things were going well, I was happier, and that would have a positive influence. I was more active, which would have a positive influence. I was back, I had distractions, and that would have a positive influence. And the same thing when I was on the way down. I was in pain, which then led to less activity, which then fed back in to make the pain worse. And then that made me sad, which made the pain worse. And so it's amazing how, it's
so
not
a downward spiral or an upward spiral.
That's right. It's amazing how intertwined everything is.
It is.
But and it's not just the scan either. It's also the language and the way the scan gets described. I mean, initially, as I said, if that scan came back to me and the doctor had said, "Oh yeah, no, that's fine, that's pretty normal," and then put that scan away, then it wouldn't have had anywhere near the impact that it ended up having. But
so what would you tell a healthcare practitioner then if they had another Joe come to see them?
Oh wow. There's so many things that I would love to change about my journey, but then also I'm grateful that I've gone through it, because it just it's all worked out. But I mean, at the 3 year, when I was absolutely at rock bottom, and I would just have loved to be able to go back and say to myself at the start, look, don't even worry about getting scanned. You're fine. You just need to move and you'll heal. Your body will heal. It's fine. But you're not as damaged as you think you are. Don't worry about that side of things. But even if for the healthcare practitioner, I would have said, mate, just reassure this person. Like, words are so powerful. It's amazing. Like, you trust in doctors to, maybe wrongly, but you just think that they will have the answers and that the advice that they give you will help. So their words carry so much more weight than your typical person, like just a standard Joe Blogs on the street, says something, you just go, oh, well, that's, but when a doctor says something to you, like, this is degenerative, or you've got the back of a 50-year-old, or you need to protect your back, or your back is these things, they carry a huge amount of weight. So I would say, if there was some advice for a healthcare practitioner treating me back then, I would have said, look, that your words carry so much weight. So you need to reassure this person and
So what's your picture of your back now then, Joe? Because my understanding is that you still get some back pain from time to time. It's not like you're cured.
When I really go hard, I mean, the truth of it is, Pete, is I don't care what my back looks like now. Right. I just
because it does what you want.
Because it does what I want.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
to be honest, I don't want to know what it looks like. I don't care what it looks like. All I care is that I'm doing the stuff that I want to be able to do. Yep. But look, I've got no idea. I don't really care.
So you park that one.
Me and him are friends at the moment, so we're all good. Right. But look, you know what? I'm not even interested. I wouldn't say that I'm scared to know, but I wouldn't want to know.
But you trust your back now.
Yeah,
clearly. You've got a good relationship with it.
Yeah.
Before you feared it.
Absolutely. So now, I mean, I still get back pain.
And what do you do if you get it?
I just go and do something fun or a bit distracting, or I just most of the time now when I'm getting a bit of pain is after I've had a really big day, or I've done something stupid the day before, or I've lifted, and it feels different. Like now when I get back pain, it feels like it's just muscle pain. I'm a bit stiff now from what I did yesterday. But this morning I woke up and it was a bit sore, and I was like, oh God. And so I went, oh, well, I know what will help, a bit of blood pumping. And so I went for a run. Right. And after that I felt absolutely great.
Right.
And so it's very different.
So that's a really different response to
absolutely.
your other journey where you would have stopped and protected and avoided.
I would have probably tried to sit upright. When I was here, I would have been like this, and I would have probably been probably sitting at home on the couch trying not to move too much while letting my back heal while worrying about my back. Right. That's probably what I would have done previously. So
quite a different response.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the imaging findings, if we bring it back to the scans, because that was the topic of the episode, they held a lot of power for you, obviously.
Amazing amount, yeah.
I want to quickly talk about how reliable those scan findings are. So if we took you and you had an MRI at 9 other MRI centres than the one you had.
Oh, yeah.
What do you reckon the agreement is between those radiologists, or between the reports of the MRI?
Oh, wow. I would have thought an MRI is pretty accurate.
You'd hope so.
I would have thought so, yeah. So, yeah.
Do you want to talk about it? Do you want me to say it? So they did this study. They had a lady who had back pain and raging leg pain, or sciatica type symptoms down her leg.
Sound like fun.
And they within the space of 3 weeks, they sent her to 10 different MRI scanning places just to see what the commonalities were. There was not one common finding across all MRIs. I think there was 14 different findings, so 14 unique different findings on the scan reported, and each radiologist averaged 2 errors compared to the 2 spinal, I think they were neurosurgeons or neuroradiologists that commented on the kind of the gold standard picture. So even, and that's, I don't know whether I should have told you that.
Oh,
It's past Joe now.
yeah. Oh, I'm not going to go get an MRI on that.
It's water off a duck's back now. But even, those findings that the doctors are reporting either correctly or incorrectly, they might not even be the same as what if you were to get another MRI from a different place.
I just wanted to pause here for a second because when we recorded the podcast, I don't think I made this point particularly clear. I also made an error relating to how many errors each radiologist made. The irony. Anyway, that study of a lady with back and leg pain going to 10 different MRI centres within 3 weeks identified 49 different findings. 16 were unique and only found once among all 10 reports, and not a single finding was common among all 10 reports. Now, each radiologist averaged 12 errors, not 2, as I said in the conversation with Joe. The take home from that is don't just rely on the scan or take it as gospel. Consider this only as part of the bigger clinical picture. So now that's clarified, let's head back to the conversation.
So that's an important thing to consider, and MRIs are sort of the gold standard for that.
And I think the other thing that's really important to understand is that your spine is never static. It's like the garden doesn't look the same today as it will in a month. Yeah. Your spine changes over time. We know this from the research that if you look at longitudinal studies, that studies over periods of time, and you look at active populations versus people who are inactive, and that's the irony, is that inactive populations show more progression of those changes, negative changes on the scan, than active populations. So we have this idea that you need to protect your back. In fact, I had this conversation yesterday with a person going, well, I'm thinking if it's degenerative now, I really don't want to use it too much because I've got these number of years left. And that was what you were thinking. Yeah. Where in actual fact, it's the opposite.
To protect it, you need to use it
back and use it and load it because that's what keeps it healthy.
Which makes sense, really.
Totally does.
I mean, you go to the gym, you do a whole lot of bicep curls.
Yeah. What happens?
Your body lays down new tissue.
Exactly.
You get new tissue.
So instead of degenerating, we're constantly
laying down new tissue.
Regenerating.
It makes so much sense. But then for some reason, when it's your back that's involved, you just act completely differently.
Yeah.
Like exactly. if it was my, I've rolled my ankle 50 times. And never once did I think to myself, well, the only way that this ankle is going to get better is if I don't move it ever again.
So why the back so differently, Joe?
I don't know. I think I think it's because we're always told, lift with a straight back. We're constantly told that, keep a good posture, keep your core tight, lift with bent knees, straight back. So I think that we're sort of conditioned to think that our backs are a fragile structure. Then on top of that, they're such an important structure that everything that we do, yet with a lot of things, we can get around certain movements without using our back. I mean, you can't walk without using your ankle. And so at some point, you're just going to have to get up there and walk, and your ankle's then going to start moving, and then it's going to feel better. But it's amazing the stuff that you can get done without ever moving your back. But it just leads to a whole
world of pain,
of problems. So no, it's amazing. If we had no choice but to bend our backs, if we had no choice but to twist and load, then I hate to think how many people are going through what I was going through unnecessarily. It's terrible.
You sort of mentioned before this idea that the more we load our spines, actually that's better for us. And that's sort of highlighted by a study that looked at cyclists that had healthier looking spines than those that didn't cycle. Same with running. Yeah. The other side of the coin is that, disc prolapses, typically the bigger they are, the more likely they are to heal. And we know that about
reabsorb.
Reabsorb is probably a better word for that. We know that about sort of 65% of disc prolapses will reabsorb, but the amount of resorption is completely unrelated to whether that person gets better or not. So people could get better and their disc looks worse.
people could not get better and their disc looks better on imaging. So there's this really kind of confusing relationship out there between imaging findings and scans.
Pain is not simple.
It's exactly right. And that's why unraveling the complexity of it is kind of the key job of a good healthcare practitioner or a team of practitioners to kind of support people on that journey.
Yeah. Joe, you kind of mentioned before there was a little bit of a period there where everything was going great. You were back to doing everything that you loved, and then shit hit the fan.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, about a year after I started coming good and I got some really good advice, I ended up having a pain flare. And I think almost the sailing was a little bit too smooth for the 12 months before it, because it came out of nowhere and it absolutely hit me for six. So essentially I'd been going good for about 10, 12 months. And then out of nowhere, there was just a tiny little niggle. And then over about an hour, it built up. And then the familiar sensation of my back going into spasm was there, and I was all bent and I was just in a lot of pain and I couldn't relax, and my mind was going back to, oh God, I was still trying to move as much as I could, but my mind was going back to, what if?
Unfortunately,
what if,
my subconscious, because I had that
a few more negative thoughts.
And there was a period where my brain was anxious.
Then,
and still is a
the
little
pain
bit.
probably only lasted about a week.
At the moment, it's
the
going
negative,
through negative possibilities.
It just made me feel vulnerable again, and the negative mental sort of side of things hung around for months and months.
These things do,
and I started having just a few more pain flares, and things just sort of started to unravel.
So I was lucky enough to
it's-
catch up with you.
it's
Well,
giving
yeah,
it
fortunate
power
enough to
and-
catch up with you at that time.
Yeah.
I actually recorded a little bit of a video which I want to play for you now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it sort of highlights certainly how when you have a pain flare, lots of your old beliefs come rushing back.
Absolutely.
So let's have a quick watch. So that was about 2 years ago, one or 2 years ago.
Yeah. I guess probably more than 2 years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. So watching that back now, what's going through your head?
Oh, it just I remember it like it was yesterday. Like just the rapid progression, and then all of a sudden I just had these pain flares, and I was right back where I sort of started, and I just started being really worried again. And I mean, it was like you're building a house or a tower or a stack of Jenga, and you just start taking pieces out. Every flare was like just taking pieces out of that foundation that I worked so hard and done, helped build up. And I guess what happened is the pain flare, although the original pain flare only lasted a week or two, it got me worried again. And then that worry fed back in to not only making the pain worse, but also wondering what was behind the pain. And then when that started happening, maybe my movement started being affected. I started becoming a bit worried to do certain things again. And then, I stopped doing things that were distracting and fun. And I just ended up, it was just a downward sort of spiral down, and everything sort of fed back into making the pain worse. Then the pain fed into my mental health, and then the mental health just has an impact on everything.
And
So
what would you say to that, Joe, now?
don't worry about it.
Would he have listened to you though?
Oh, I don't know. I like to think I'd listen to myself. But no, look, I mean, honestly, if I saw into the future, at that point in time, if I looked forward into the future and saw where I am now, it would have been a 2-week problem. I would have taken it a little bit easy while the pain was bad, while it was flared up, and then I would have just got on with it. Because, if the worry's not there about the loss of function and identity and physical activity and work and that sort of stuff. If the worry's not there, then pain's easy to deal with. I mean, if you think, well, if the pain doesn't mean anything, the pain itself isn't really a problem. It's what the pain means. And so if you look forward and go, oh, if I saw myself in 80 years and I was jogging down the street, I wouldn't have a care in the world until I probably got to 80, and then I'd start worrying again. But
so did you get another scan then?
Nah.
Why?
Because
given that you were worried about it, why didn't you?
Because I had some really good people in my corner telling me I didn't need to.
Right.
And I didn't. And also, even though I was back to sort of, I got really bad. I spiraled all the way back down to not quite where I was, but pretty close. But I still held on to some of the key messages from all of my time and my experience from the progression before. And so I knew that, I was still telling myself all the right messages. Pain doesn't mean damage. Movement's good for me. I still had all these positive messages going through my head, which I didn't have before, but they were just getting overwhelmed by the other side of things, which was that. But I still had some really good people in my corner telling me, you're going to get through this. And I ended up, it was a while. I mean, a 2-week problem became a 6-month problem, but, slowly got back on top of it. And I'm away now. So it's all good. So
if you had another 2-week event, do you think it would be different the next time?
I had a week-long event about 6 months ago, actually. And it was weird. I think the more experience that you have dealing with this, and the more tools I'd been given, and the more I'd been sort of, you live the experience, and once you've done these things a few times before, as I said, I think the first time the sailing was a little bit too smooth, but now that I've had a few rockier sort of seas, it just helps, So
what did you different the last time? 6 months ago?
I just didn't worry. I just distracted myself. I just went, you know what, this will get better. I can't do X, Y, and Z for now, but as soon as I can do those things, I'm going to do them. Right. And I sort of went, well, I've been so much worse than this before. Why is this going to be any different to the last 2-3 times where, I got back to being awesome. Got back to being fantastic.
And what if it didn't get better in a week? How would you have felt then?
I mean, look, I still am really, really happy that I know when things get really bad, I've still got some really good people in my corner.
Yeah, right. So did you go and see anyone 6 months ago?
I didn't.
You did it yourself?
I did it myself.
Right. Okay.
And as you said, because it only lasted a week, maybe that was, if it lasted a month or 2 months, I mean, it's
sought some help.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's, I didn't seek help. Maybe a week wasn't long enough. I was able to navigate that myself. But I don't know if it had been going for 2 weeks or a month or 2 months, I would have started to call in some, or I would have started to mobilize the team.
Yeah. So I think that's really important because, what we do know about pain is that it's strongly linked to memory. And you can have some really negative memories, but you can actually build some really positive memories. And the old memories, which were negative, have been superseded by some pretty potent, powerful, positive memories.
Absolutely.
And that's what you leaned back on the last time. And it worked. And it kind of circumvented that cycle of negative spiral, thinking, acting, doing that stuff that's just so consuming.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also is whereas I used to just have these flares for no real reason. I mean, the last 6 months or the last year, I've been hammering myself. I mean, I should have pain, but I don't. I mean, I've done things the last 2 years, 12 months that I never thought I'd get to do again. So it's it's, I guess you just, doing is believing. So I don't know. It was I guess I've had enough repeats that I'm getting better and better and better. I'm still not. I'm not saying that my journey's over, or I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm never going to have an
Yeah.
issue with pain again,
Yeah, exactly.
because I almost certainly will. But I know that, you know, my experience up till now will help me, and then I've still got a
Yeah.
lot of
You've
help.
got tools in your toolkit.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I haven't had to use the tools at my disposal, but it's
Well, you've got tools in your toolkit, and then you've got co-work. You
Oh,
know,
and then I've
you've
got
got
backup.
you've got some
and
backup
I've got other tools.
And it's probably important to mention that you didn't have anything serious in terms of signs and symptoms that we were talking about
Exactly,
before,
yeah.
changes to your bladder or bowel or things like that.
Oh,
That
yeah,
was
but-
talked about before.
But I mean, back in the day, like when I was really, really bad, if you told me, oh, not being able to go to the toilet is a sign of something really bad, I wouldn't have been able to crap for a week. I mean, I would have just gone, oh, well, I would have stood at the toilet not being able to wee, you know? Like it was,
so as a healthy practitioner, we'd ask about it, but we wouldn't tell you it was a bad thing.
yeah, that's right. But, you know, it's amazing. You know, it's... Your head can do some weird and wonderful things when it's scared.
And both ways.
Oh, both ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks, Joe.
No worries. Happy to be here. Cheers.
Good on you.
So there you have it, the end of another episode. A quick recap of the take-homes. Imaging is important, but usually only for 5 to 10% of people with back pain. Imaging findings are common in people without pain and don't predict future pain or function. MRI reports don't appear to be that consistent between MRI centres. And routine imaging is not associated with better outcomes and is often harmful, not to mention costly. As I mentioned, show notes featuring 3 imaging-related infographics and the references discussed today can be found at www.bodylogic.physio/podcast. Please subscribe, share and review, and until next time, remember to ask, is there more to pain than damage? Please note, what you heard on this episode of Empowered Beyond Pain is strictly for information purposes only and does not substitute individualised care from a trusted and licensed health professional. If you would like individualised, high-value care for your pain, sports or pelvic health problem, head to the BodyLogic website and make an appointment. Theme music generously provided by Fervin and Cash.